Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I hope that you're all doing well. So soon, I'm super excited because I'll be living on my own for the first time. I'm eager to see how I like it and make things how I want it to be in my home. But as this is approaching, I've been reflecting on the many years that I've lived with other people. And today I want to share with you my top tips of how to live with someone who's visually impaired. So that if you're living with someone who's visually impaired, or you spend a lot of time with people who are visually impaired, hopefully these tips will help you to adjust and make it easier on both parties.
My name is Angela and I'm a visually impaired designer.
Before I jump into the more technical or practical tips that you can implement in your home, I want to make sure that it's clear that it seems like one of the most effective things you can do is to simply just make sure you're communicating. Communicate. Okay, so the first group of tips that I have for you have to do with being organized. Being organized is key. Now, this could be a hard one for some people who don't tend to be organized naturally, but it's super important for people who are visually impaired to have a home for everything. They need to know exactly where things are, and then if there's other people using the same objects in common areas, they need to be put back where they came from. Let's say, for example, if you keep your scissors in a certain drawer, and one day you use it and you decide to just chuck it on the counter for a week or two, and that person who's visually impaired really needs to use the scissors to open something up. They go to the drawer where the scissors are supposed to belong, but they're not there. Well, this makes it difficult because they can't see that they're just on the counter above where the drawer was. Then they have to start thinking, where would these maybe be, feel around for them, and it just makes it more complicated. So making the effort of putting things back where they belong and making sure everything has a home will go a long way. And if you are going to go for the style of throwing things in like a basket or whatever it is, then putting them in groups that make sense, so like objects put together, could still be a helpful thing for someone who's visually impaired. Now, going along with having containers and separating things, it can really help to label things. So you can use a normal labeler. You can use one that has large print for the labels. You could do color coding. You could use a Braille labeler if they read Braille. You could use textures to distinguish. You could also distinguish by the shape or the color or material of the bin or container that you're putting things in. Just finding a way that works for you to identify what different things are where. Here I have my labeler. I specifically picked this one because it can do large print labels on top of just normal print labels. It uses a simple sans serif font that's easy to read as well. So you can type all the letters on here. You can do numbers, and it's just super easy to type whatever you want, and then you print it out and you pull off the back and then use the label that way. Here's an example of somewhere where I'm using labels. So I made a label for this container that has all these small little containers. This really helps me to organize all my small little gadgets that don't necessarily always have a home. I love this container. It makes it so everything's organized and super easy for me to find things. So this one specifically has some that are a little bit larger, and then some small ones where I keep pens, pencils, staplers, paper clips, all that kind of stuff. The next gadget I wanted to show you was this Braille labeler. So it has the whole alphabet on the outside edge here. You move the ring and make it to what letter you want it to be, which you probably can't do with one hand, but I'll show you how you use it. After you get it to the letter you want, you just push this. It punches that letter that you chose, and then it comes out as a Braille label that's clear, and you pull off the back, and then you can stick it wherever you want, and then you have a Braille label. I thought I would also mention that on top of having the Braille letters here that are tactile, it has the letters visually here in high contrast at the bottom. So if you aren't fully used to Braille, or if you're making labels for someone who's visually impaired and you don't actually know Braille yourself, you can still use this device to create labels for someone else. My last tip about organizing things is considering what type of material your containers are. If you have clear containers, it can be a lot of visual noise, but also could help some people be able to distinguish what is inside. So if you prefer being able to see what's inside without having to open it and you're not using labels, then that could work. For me personally, I prefer containers that are not transparent because it reduces the amount of visual noise. The next group of tips I have for you is about visual and tactile cues. People who are visually impaired rely a lot on touch. They use their hands to determine a lot of things. So a helpful thing is using something similar to these bump dots. I just have a couple of sheets of stickers and they're little raised dots. I have a square one that's brown. I have some that are indented circular one, some raised dots that are gray. So they vary in size and shape and color. These can be used around the home on objects that either have a touch screen, and so you can put it on there so that the person who's visually impaired can know like a base of where the buttons are so that they can use the touch screen a little easier. These can really be used anywhere that someone needs an affordance or some kind of indication of where something is that they might not be able to see with their eyes. Here's a better, closer look at the bump dots that I've gotten. I just got these off of Amazon, and I'll make sure to link them for you below if you're interested. Here's one example of how you might use a bump dot. So here I'm showing 3 different light switches that are right next to each other. If I wanted to make sure it was clear which one of these switches was to turn on the dining room, I could stick this bump dot here in the middle, right below or above that light switch. Then when someone comes and touches it, they would know this bump dot that's a square turns on and off the dining room light. Another example of how you could use a bump dot is, for example, I'm showing my microwave here. So I've put a bump dot here on the start button, or you can add 30 seconds. This is a key that's used a lot, and it can just be used by clicking it multiple times to start it for as long as you want. It also could make sense to put a bump dot, say on like the number 5, so that it's a point of reference to know that the numbers surrounding it is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. And that way there's kind of a indicator of how to know which buttons to click. You could also create some tactile cues by using different little tapes or textures. You could use rope or string. It just depends on what you personally want to use to help a person have those indicators around the house. We'll talk about some other visual and tactile cues that you can incorporate when I talk about changing or updating your environment. The next group of tips that I want to go over are removing barriers or things that might become a problem. Now, the most basic one is keeping your house clean so that there's not stuff chucked all over the floor. If you're the type of person who just throw your clothes or take off your shoes randomly and don't put them away, these are potentially hazardous things that someone who's visually impaired might not see and trip over while trying to walk around the home. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people who I live with leave cupboard doors open or drawers or anything that sticks out. When purchasing furniture, it would be good to avoid glass furniture. Say you have a coffee table that's made out of glass. That might be difficult for someone who's visually impaired to see. Also, making sure to avoid furniture that might be hazardous, such as sharp corners or things that they can run into and it would hurt. It can be important to make sure you pay attention while in the kitchen using objects that could cause some safety issues. For example, being aware of when you have a hot pan or pot and making sure that pot or pan is pushed back so that if the person you live with who's visually impaired walks by, won't accidentally run into it because the handle is over the edge or something. Making sure that knives aren't just left hanging over the edge of the counter when using them, or just leaving on the counter for a long extended time while you're not using them could be hazardous. Making sure that you push chairs or benches under the table when you're done using it so that the person who's visually impaired does not run into that furniture either. One small thing to keep in mind is it can be hard as someone who's visually impaired to be able to see dirt that you typically will probably see. For example, growing up, I always hated sweeping and mopping the floor for a chore because I always had a very difficult time seeing dirt on the floor. So just keep in mind that if they do some cleaning and it's not perfectly clean, it's not that they didn't want it to be clean, they probably just didn't see the dirt. All right, the last category is ways to change the environment or update the environment so that it works and is catered towards the person who's visually impaired. Really being intentional about lighting can really be important and make a huge difference. If there are areas in the home that are really dark, it will really make it harder for the person who's visually impaired to complete certain tasks. So being aware of what the light is like in a room and intentionally making it a good brightness so that those specific tasks can be complete will help out so much. The next thing that I have found super helpful and I'm super excited to implement in my new place when I move is utilizing smart devices such as Alexa or Google Homes so that the person who's visually impaired can turn off the lights, they can change the temperature, they can even lock doors using their voice only, and they don't have to rely on their vision to complete some of these tasks that you would normally have to do. An important design element to pay attention to is contrast. So using dark and light colors to your advantage. So painting a doorway a bright color so that it contrasts with the wall, or paint it black if the walls are going to be white. Finding a way to make that doorway pop can make it easy for a person to find the doorway. Paying attention to the contrast between the flooring, the wall, and the furniture can make it easier for someone to be able to figure out where that furniture is and how to interact with it. Using colorful or bright tape, string, whatever you want to use can also help you identify landmarks throughout the home. And then if you have landmarks established, it can help the person who's visually impaired to get around and do their thing independently. If the person you are going to live with is a cane user, it could be helpful to pay attention to the flooring if they're using a cane. For example, it might not be the best choice to use tile. Using a surface that is more smooth and doesn't have large dips will make it easier for them to use the cane without them always running into the grooves in the ground. There are so many modifications that could be made. Use your creativity to make it custom for you, and this way it will just be exactly what you need and the person you're living with who's visually impaired. I hope that you found this video helpful to understand better how you can live with someone who's visually impaired and how you can adapt the environment to make it more accessible. I'd love to hear any comments below on ways that you already are adapting your home to make it more accessible for someone who's visually impaired. If you enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up so that I know you like this video and I can do content similar to this in the future. Make sure to subscribe to my channel below. Turn on that notification bell so that you can receive notifications anytime that I post a video. I do videos every Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And I always try to reply to all the comments. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope that you have a fantastic week. Bye!